So, good morning. I'm Ria Hopkinson. I'm the Head of Content and Marketing at BOOST&Co, and I'm really glad to welcome you all to this latest webinar on how to lead in turbulent times. We have two leadership experts who I think will be the perfect people to answer that question, from Boost and from Pod Group, which is one of Boost's portfolio companies. Welcome, Charles, Jenefer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And we've had a little chat through already, and one of the topics that came up constantly in our discussions about leadership was trust and credibility. Of course, that's important at all times, but especially when people feel so uncertain and they're in a situation, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't really know what's going on. So let's kick off with that. Jenefer, do you want to give us some of your thoughts on trust and leadership?
I mean, trust is, it's the first job of a leader, isn't it? We've got to be inspiring trust in the people that follow us, motivating the people that follow us. I remember that great Seth Godin quote because it's nice and easy, short to remember: earn trust, earn trust, earn trust, and everything else will fall into place after that. So I think as leaders, as people that are being led during these difficult times, a key foundation is going to be trust.
And Charles, that's a view that you share too.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I look at it is kind of in normal times, you're putting your deposits into the bank as a leader. And you're doing that by getting people by being authentic and having the credibility. And then when you get to a situation like this, then you need to take some withdrawals and you need to be able to say to people, look, I hope that we're now in a situation where you can trust me because I have been trying to build up a bank of trust, and now I need you to be trusting me. But trust also comes down to how do you build it? And as you mentioned earlier on, we as Pod Group, as an organization, is self-managed. So trust isn't about saying you need to trust me blindness. It's about being transparent enough so that people can see why you're doing things in the first place. And from there, with that transparency, people can understand the decisions you're taking. So transparency, I think, is a very important part of trust as well.
Do you think it's just as important for leaders to let go and give people the responsibility to, take the initiative to step up in a situation like this? You need to be able to trust your leaders, but maybe you want to feel that they trust you in return.
Am I going on that one? Okay, I'm going on that one. The problem with a situation like this is that the natural inclination is actually to do the opposite. When you have external things threatening you, you want to try and control everything you can around, within your reach, and everything you can actually control, which makes it very difficult to then step out and say, I'm going to really let go, and I am going to let people take initiative in a situation which I really don't know what's going on. I really can't see what's going to go on in the future. So it's really, really hard for anybody, whether it's a leader or whether it's a family at home, to actually step back and say, I'm going to do the opposite to what my natural predisposition is to do, is to say, I'm not going to try and control this situation. But for me, and I think for us at Pod, it was quite lucky because we had a very self-managed organization. A lot of us already worked at home a lot anyway. I mean, our view on working is you work where you want. If you've got something where you need to be in meetings in the office, then you come to the office. If you don't have meetings and work at home, it's up to you. You decide that day. So for us, it was quite easy to make that shift from one to another. But still, that whole element of control is there. And so for leaders to be stepping back and going, I've got to be able to just trust and let go and not try to especially not try to micromanage in days like this, is really, really hard. I'm going to hand it over to the leadership expert now, Vic.
Charles, you can see me nodding along to what you're saying. I always battle with that sort of the idea of letting go of control. I don't know, there's something about that term, but if I can I always sort of reposition it in my mind about empowering other people. One of our great colleagues, Heather, she's our organizational psychologist here at Boost. Whenever we make the comment that we're surprised that somebody we've brought into the team is brilliant or they're doing great work, she always says, why are you surprised? We hire brilliant people. We're surrounded by brilliant people. And that's very much what I depend on. And I think us as leaders need to be depending on and trusting during times like this, is we have brought in brilliant people around us. It's time that we trust them, it's time that we empower them, and we, But
Jenefer, the problem there is what happens if you haven't brought in brilliant people, or they may not be brilliant in. They may be brilliant in or sorry, let's put that another way. They may not be brilliant at the office, but actually you've got to try and bring everybody up to be themselves and to be the best of themselves when they're not at home. When they're not in the office. So
that's sort of being their authentic self.
Yeah, and also the problem of how do you bring people up when you can't be talking to them face to face. You're trying to do it remotely. Giving that initiative. How do you give that initiative to allow people, as I say, to bring out the best of themselves?
Yeah, I must admit, Charles, I mean, and I suppose we've got different organizations, and so we can share the different views. Personally, as a sort of a personal philosophy, I believe that there is our strengths in each individual that we surround ourselves with. Part of being a leader is being able to tap into that, identify it and tap into it. It might not be exactly what you thought when you brought the person into the team or into the space, but each person has got amazing abilities, and isn't that part of our role as leaders, to be able to help them identify that, to tap into it, and to leverage it, especially at a time like this.
Yeah, I think also one of the other words you use there is teams, because the amount of research is out there about if you have star individuals, ultimately your organization is never going to do as well as teams which are working together. So especially in times like this, is how do you bring, I think it's very important to try and make sure and find ways to bring the teams together so that they are working well, and they're looking out for each other. So when you can see that somebody is perhaps faltering, and it may be just, I think we've all had it in the isolation. It's just there's been a couple of days or whatever where we've just gone, I just need to get out. I need to be able to be able to see people or whatever it is, and we're all a little bit depressed. To pull people out and be there to pull people out and do that. The problem is recognizing that, which is where I think it gets very important to be in a team situation, because you, as in your role, you may not know somebody as well enough to actually just pick up the tone of their voice or whatever it is, whereas somebody else who works with them on a day-to-day basis may. So empowering, I think it's important to almost empower everybody with the idea that they are not only doing their job, but they're also human resources, and they're looking after their team as well.
One of the things that leads me on to think about is leaders themselves, looking after themselves. We always talk about them looking after their teams, making sure that HR, making sure that everyone is okay. But what about leaders themselves in a time like this? Do they need to look after their own mental health, for example? Do they need to be particularly aware of how they are so that they can help others?
It's always a point, Ria, that I like to start at, whether you're talking about developing managerial skills or leadership skills in anybody, the first point always has got to be about leading and managing yourself. And part of that is self-care, is looking after our self-care, our mental health, just sort of checking in with ourselves on a regular basis. And I think now, at a time like this with so much uncertainty around, that's probably even more important. So for me, it's about asking myself the question, literally, when I wake up first thing in the morning: how am I feeling today? How have I slept? Am I feeling well rested? Is there something specifically that's worrying me or concerning me? Having that great mental check-in to say, what can I control? What can't I control? letting go of what I can't control and managing around what I can. I suppose it's also very pertinent because it is Mental Health Awareness Week here in the UK. Been talking about mental health awareness, and again, it comes back to us as individuals making, doing a check-in on our own mental health and seeing how we're doing. And it can be the smallest things. And I know, Charles, you were mentioning about how do we engage with our staff during times like this and keep levels of engagement high. I mean, so some of the things can be having these cool topics of conversation around exercising or journaling or picking up a hobby that you haven't had time to invest in the past as a stress reliever, as a way of offsetting anxiety, and yeah, just as a way of coping, I suppose, as well.
I think there's another completely different angle to this, is that somebody's not on mute. It is the need. I mean, I know we talked about letting go, and it's kind of coming back on the same thing, but there's a tendency for leaders to feel that they must be all-knowing and all-seeing. One of the biggest changes we made, and I write about it in the W.E.I.R.D CEO, is that what often happens with leaders is that they take on about one decision or two decisions, too many in a day, which results in a level of stress. It also results in a level of importance, because if you have people waiting for you, Sheryl Sandberg is a classic example of this at Yahoo, where she had people waiting for 3 or 4 hours to come and ask her questions because she was micromanaging to such an extent. As I said previously, the problem with that is it either ends with a divorce or a heart attack. So before that happens, generally a good idea to try and find another solution. And one of the solutions that certainly I found, and I talking to other people, is letting go, but stop trying to be all-knowing and all-seeing, and letting everybody have. I've talked about transparency already, but letting everybody have the information is a really good way to do it, because it does mean you don't have to take all the decisions. And once you're in a position where you don't have to take all the decision, your own stress levels are going to come down. And that, to me, is a very, very strong way of looking after yourself, because instead of you having to be doing everything, you're actually saying, you're saying that there are people in the organization who are quite capable of taking decisions without you there. And for me, that's the strongest way of making sure that you stay sane and everybody stays sane.
Ria, if you don't mind me adding on to that, one of the sort of the things that brings up in my mind is, again, being authentic at a time like this as a leader. And I think also sometimes as leaders we want to show that we're feeling uncertain, or that it's taking a strain on us as well, or that maybe we need a bit of downtime, a bit of time off. I know we were having a conversation this morning with somebody who was saying, bank holidays feel like a waste during lockdown. I love bank holidays. You need bank holidays during a lockdown, just to take a bit of time out and time away from my PC, time away, bless everybody on this call, but time away from virtual meetings. That can be really useful. I've consciously put a Friday in my diary to take the day off, to just take 4 days away from, trying to maintain positive outlook and looking for the silver linings. I know we spoke about that come out of something like COVID-19. Time to myself, time to pick up a really good book, time to go on some of those really cool long walks. So I suppose there's an aspect there of being authentic about a leader at a time like this, leading from what you were saying, Charles, about not having all the answers all the time, but also leading by example, and saying it's okay to have good days and great days, and it's also okay to take some downtime, even during lockdown.
Even during lockdown. That's really interesting, Jenefer. And mentioning authenticity reminds me of another point that we discussed, a slightly more depressing one. We all
have to go there.
Depressing topics? No.
Maybe not quite as well. We would all like to think that we have authentic leaders that we can trust. This is the ideal. So we're discussing how we think things should be. But we're in a very uncertain situation, and there are not necessarily just this one. There are countries across the world where people are being led by people they can't necessarily believe everything that they're being told. They're maybe not giving straight information. Maybe they're being given confusing information, and they don't understand which way to interpret it and what they should do. Do you think people feel confident trusting their leaders if they're in a situation whereby the people in charge of their country maybe are confusing them? Does it impact on how people want to be led and what they're looking for in their leaders more immediately?
Charles, do you want to take a bite of the do we our leaders bring these tasks?
I need to take this one.
Yeah, Ria, it's a tricky topic, and I tread lightly on it because I do have a huge amount of respect for our country leaders at a time like this. It is an incredibly difficult position to be in. I wouldn't go so far as saying I'd be the sort of president that stood up and said things like inject disinfectant or whatever. But I think it's taken us all a while to get our heads around COVID-19 and the impacts. Absolutely, all of us are looking to the leaders of our countries. We want to trust them. We want to trust the direction that they're sending us in. We want to trust the measures that they're putting in place to keeping us safe. I suppose it comes back to that question of sort of what can I control and what can't I control. I can't control what the leaders of my country are going to say and the sort of guidelines that they're going to put in place. So I can choose to trust or not. I suppose that's an individual discussion. It's what I can say is it's definitely going to add to your sense of uncertainty or concern, depending on how you feel of the leadership of your country.
I think so. Thanks, Jenefer. You give me a chance to actually think through. Leading country in some ways has the same problem as leading an organization. So I'm actually going to bundle these two together. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem, and especially in a situation like now where you can't be talking face to face, is actually communication. And not necessarily what somebody is saying. I've done this many times. What I thought I've said has been completely misunderstood. Well, I've viewed the feedback afterwards has been my view that it wasn't what I was trying to say in the first place. So there's two problems there. When you're on an international level, obviously you have to deal with press, but even when you're in an organizational level, you still need to think about the circumstances in which your information is going to be said, and you need to take that into account, and specifically the people who are going to be hearing it. If people are really nervous, they can jump to conclusions. So sometimes, I'm not saying you don't say things, but sometimes you do need to re-emphasize that they don't need to be particularly nervous about this. I mean, there is, even within our own organization, I'm sure every organization, when things have, suddenly there's a downturn in revenue, people is, am I going to be made unemployed? And it's quite easy for people to take something and see the negative side of that, especially with so much negativity floating around anyway, and see the negative side of a comment which was not meant or intended in that context. And as leaders, we're thinking perhaps completely differently to other people. We're seeing a different picture, or not even just as leaders. Everybody is seeing their own picture, so people are going to interpret it their own way. So I think there is a need to make sure that the context of what you're trying to say is being understood by the people who are hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
Communication, it's a key role of leaders across the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good communication. I think maybe just to build on that, I mean, I know we spoke a bit about sort of roles of leaders and I suppose how they change. What is the role of a leader now during turbulent times or during a crisis? And I reflected a whole lot on that because I think obviously there's a laundry list of the role of leaders that I think, we probably are quite clear on. The three that really stood out for me though at times like this are to be present, to be visible, and to be available. So, you know, being present, even though you obviously are planning and thinking for the long term, it's really important to demonstrate that you're physically present here, you're visible, i.e. your teams have an opportunity to see you, your teams both internally, your clients and your customers externally. Really important to be visible at times like this. And then the to be available, I suppose, is to be available for questions, to be available for people to engage with you, to be available to listen to concerns and acknowledge the human tragedy, the uncertainty, but really, really important so people feel like they can get hold of you, your teams, your leaders, your customers, your clients. So yeah, be present, be visible, be available. I think really sort of sticks with me, and maybe our country leaders could be aiming for the same thing.
Do you think, Jenefer, that those things all sound very positive for making people feel confident in the present? Do you think leaders also need to set clear goals to give people a signpost to the future? So we feel uncertain, but we think it's going to be okay. You can trust in us to get us there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's again one of those key roles of a leader, isn't it? To create some certainty amongst the uncertainty for all of us that are following. So absolutely clear goals, and then going back to Charles's point, then being able to communicate them really clearly. This is the goal. This is what we're striving for. I read somebody said you want to try and keep things going as normally as they would be, despite everything that's sort of happening externally. I think that might be, wow, that's quite a task, especially right now. But definitely, what are our goals? Maybe even going back, what is the purpose? What did we commit to initially? Has that changed? Yes or no? What do our goals look like as a result of that? Clearly communicating that, and then keeping everybody motivated to keep going in that direction, even in times like this with all this uncertainty.
And there's an interesting word, purpose, there, Jenefer, because I fully agree with you that there is a huge need to get the purpose across, and then the opportunity, or to allow people to have the opportunity to translate that purpose into their own meaning. And what's happened, obviously, is because we've all changed the way that we've worked, is the meaning of the work has changed. And I'm really hoping that for a lot of people, and then this will go up organizations, that their meaning has changed. And this will be the drive to much better working practices and much more allowing people to work the way that they want to work. I'm really hoping that this will come out, but that's only going to happen if people have the opportunity to look at what their own meaning is.
That makes me think of the phrase that keeps popping up absolutely all the time, which is the new normal. What do you both think leaders can do is the new normal, how similar is that to what we had in the past? Should we be trying to salvage the past, or should we just be moving on and accepting that things are going to happen now?
That's what scares me. Sorry, Jenefer, do you want to go on?
Go ahead, Charles, go ahead.
That's what scares me enormously. There's one of my colleagues in another organization I'm involved in. Her partner works for let's not say the name, a large company that makes planes, and they seem to think that their employees should come straight back to work as soon as possible. It didn't seem like they had thought through that. What are the advantages of what's happened? What do people want to do themselves? And I think those companies which are going to look at this and go, we're going to change. For example, Twitter has now said that all of their employees can work remotely indefinitely. I'm not entirely convinced that that is the way to do it either. I think the point should be is you allow your employees to work where they think it's best. And there are times when definitely face-to-face meetings works better. But if people or leaders come out of this and expect to go back to an old situation, then I think that their days are going to be numbered, because there's going to be so many organizations which are going to have employees which are going to demand to work in a different way, which is hopefully going to be much better quality of life and much more productive, and actually at the end of the day much more productive, and those are going to be the organizations which in the future will attract the better employees. So for me, those companies which try and go back to where it was before and try and have the same way of working exactly, they're going to lose out.
Ria, how we've interpreted this at Boost, and you'll know this, is we've coined the phrase the best of both worlds. So we've encouraged all of us to have a look at the lessons that we've learned during COVID, during lockdown, during this big reset that we've all had. And, you know, this huge, big opportunity to really work from home and get a sense of how that works, what doesn't, and sort that out to a large extent. So the best of both worlds is how we're trying to look at it. And I think we're a very big part of what we're going to recommend going forward as a business is going to be taken by the steer our people are giving us. So exactly to your point, Charles, you know, if you look at two sides of the spectrum, the one side is everybody in the office, the other side is everybody at home. And in between, you've got the flexibility to move around there, depending on an individual's preference, depending on how they're feeling about circumstances right now. I think some people are going to be afraid to start coming out and going back to the office for their health, for the well-being of their family. Yep. At home. Potentially they're got an elderly parent or young children that they're looking after. Others are going to be thrilled to get back to the office and can't wait and have really missed that social interaction. So for us, there is that spectrum, and we're engaging with our people, obviously understanding the expectations from our clients, and we're engaging to see where on that spectrum is going to work best for everybody for now. Bearing in mind that come September, that might look slightly different. When schools open, that'll look slightly different. Come December, I suspect that'll look slightly different. So that's how we're looking at it. Best of both worlds. Take the learnings from this great opportunity we've all had to work from home and have the conversation about where on that spectrum is going to work for everybody going forward.
Bringing up one of the points you said there, Jenefer, going back on the issue of trust, I think the companies have the potential to, or leaders, or even managers, whatever, have the potential to lose all credibility if they are forcing people to go back to work when employees are not comfortable to do so. For example, as you said, they might have elderly relatives or whatever, and that will diminish and kill a trust with an employee, I think, faster than anything else at the moment.
Agreed.
Especially if you have a vast majority of the workforce that doesn't really feel comfortable going back to work and the leader tries to enforce their will. That's not going to work, is it?
Well, I mean, even whether it's a vast majority or even whether it's a single employee, if a single employee feels that they're putting their relatives at risk by going back to work, that you've killed any trust that you could possibly have with that employee.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to remind everyone that we are into question time, but so if you want to type any questions into the chat box, please do, and we'll address any thoughts that you want to put to Charles and Jenefer. But we can continue. We can continue the chat while we see if any questions come in. Any more thoughts on silver linings? I know it's hard to talk about silver linings in regard to a global pandemic, but these changes to the way we work may well be a good thing. How about for leadership? Will leadership as a whole have to change?
Just picking up on silver linings, Ria, anybody that's had a chat with me in the last week will know that that's something I've tried to have a bit of a conversation about and to sort of discover, because I think there are silver linings all over this opportunity to work from home and this global reset that we've gone through. I know that positivity is definitely a strength of mine, so looking for the silver lining potentially comes a bit more naturally. But just, I mean, in terms of some of the examples from chatting through some of our teams, we've had two of our teams that have worked much more closely together during this time by virtue of one of their businesses really slowing down and the other one really ramping up. And what that's done is you've given opportunities to people in Team A to become members of Team B and really see how that works, really get engrossed in that side of the business, and then move back into their original role. And I was just saying to some of those team members, it's very seldom, very rare that you'd get the opportunity to do that without sort of, leaving one role and actually going and picking up another. And now you've had that opportunity. It's going to foster much greater, more close working together, a much better understanding. One of the individuals said to me, now I understand why they ask questions like they do, or why they raise concerns like they do, because I've really had the opportunity to work closely there. So just one example of a silver lining that's come out of time like this.
I was interviewing the CEO of W.E.I.R, which is a kind of Slack alternative, more secure Slack alternative, the other day, and he was very surprised that he's been able to trust as much as he can. He went in there not. I can't paraphrase him too much, but he went in there, I think, with a view that he wouldn't be able to, that people need to be working in the office. And now he's found that people aren't, and he's been able to give a lot more trust than he thought he could. So that was definitely one. I think the other one, which is interesting, is the whole changing digital transformation piece. We have in 3 months or 2 months moved the whole digital transformation and people's expectations of digital transformation so far forward compared to how long it would have taken had we not done that. And people have seen that it can work, and it is working. It potentially has some other issues in terms of what happens when we have more automation, for sure, but it's still it's forcing a change on us, which was going to come one way or other. And perhaps the fact that it's allowed more people to see that it can work than would have otherwise been possible.
I absolutely agree on that point. I've heard of organizations where individuals weren't allowed to work from home for whatever reason. There can be a variety of reasons. They've now had to work from home. So it's proved to individuals as well as to organizations that substantially it's possible, not without teething problems, but substantially that it's possible. I think it's a real silver lining.
We have a question from Sophia that relates to this, actually. She asked your thoughts on virtual leadership programs, because of course, Jenefer, I know you've done so much leadership training and it's normally face-to-face, isn't it? And Sophia says that it's very different how you create a safe space in these times when we're not necessarily in the same room.
Sophia is a great colleague of mine from South Africa. Sophia, thank you. It's a great question. Look, the reality is we've had to get creative. What we've done at Boost is first of all, it's given us a great opportunity to move up a whole lot of our programs because I think we've experienced a bit more of an opportunity and a willingness of people to engage as they sort of been getting used to lockdown. Charles, you were saying earlier, is there, sometimes still a face-to-face interaction is going to be ideal, and we haven't had the opportunity to do that. So, yeah, we've looked at trying a couple of different ways of doing things. So we've had what we've called manager circles, which is an opportunity for a small group of our managers to get together with a topic of conversation, completely unfacilitated, just really having an opportunity to get together and to discuss around a certain topic. Obviously, virtual classroom sessions we've tried. I do find, though, that they can be nowhere near the length of time that you'd normally have in a classroom. I think it's a great opportunity to start getting creative with all the different ways that we like to learn. Some of us enjoy a case study. Let me go away and really immerse myself in reading this case study. Others will love video clips and want to see video interviews, much more sort of visually stimulated. Others will want to keep journals and will want to have a lot of time for self-reflection and to be able to make a whole lot of notes. So I think it's an opportunity to have a whole lot of fun in rethinking how we run our programs, potentially, doing them sort of, modularized, so over a period of weeks, as opposed to 2 full days that we would have had in a classroom. Especially with, being able to have immersions, taking people out of the office and putting them into a different environment.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of a couple of ideas off the top of my head, but none of them have been tested. But I think the bottom line is there. It's a great opportunity to get creative. It's a great opportunity to get creative, and I think it's put the spotlight onto virtual learning programs potentially we haven't had the incentive for in the past.
And Amy's dropped in a question as well. She says, when we're talking about clear and concise communication, how important that is. It's especially difficult in times like this. And how do you ensure it happens when everyone's working remotely? So I guess what you've talked about, Jenefer, in terms of bringing more people into the communication circles helps to make it more transparent as well as coming from the top.
Absolutely. Oh, and one of the ideas, Amy, that's worked really well for us at Boost is we've started having a morning call. Every morning, 9:30, we kick off with a call that's led by our partners and really gives everybody an insight in terms of exactly what's happening in the business. I appreciate that every morning might sound like a lot, and we actually tested it with all our staff to say, is this something that we should continue going forward? And there was a lot more support for it than I thought there would be. It has enabled us to keep the communication going. It has enabled us to keep the engagement levels going. And I think potentially while we've all been getting used to the routine of working from home, it's given us, a lot of us, the necessary structure we've needed to sort of start off our day at least. So that would be my quick insight in terms of clear communication. Charles, would you like
Jenefer,
to add?
you say that you do that call is with the leaders presenting, or is that everybody?
It's everybody on the call. The leaders always kick off the call with the updates on what's happening from a business point of view. But the idea is that there's as much engagement as there can possibly be on a morning call.
Okay, no, it's an interesting comparison of what we do at Pod is every day. There's about 3 different daily meetings which happen. So the Hong Kong office links in with the European office in the morning, and then in the evening we have the European office linking in with the US office. We keep it to 10 minutes, but everybody goes through. We literally say, do you have it? So, and we don't have anybody leading the conversation, so we have to pass the ball on to somebody else, it's if they've got nothing, the point about it is to say things that they may, which are relevant to everybody else on the call. So you're not going up and back down again, you're just going straight across, which seems to work quite well. And also generally the first couple of minutes is people bantering with each other.
Can you give us an example of a topic that might be covered then, Charles?
Oh, anything that, so quite often it's operational, but anything which will have a relevance on anybody else in the organization that person's working on. Probably a third to a half of the people would say, I've got nothing which is relevant to other people. And we really, really emphasized it's not an opportunity to say how great you are and what you're doing. In fact, if they start saying that somebody will cut them off and go, not relevant, because otherwise it just gets too long. The other thing which we do, which we found, I was dead against this when it started, is a weekly newsletter. And the person who puts it together has a very tongue-in-cheek newsletter. So half of it is not related to work, but what people have done either outside work or the sort of less or more humorous things that they've done at work. We were doing a presentation last night and to some clients, and the person who was presenting managed to spill a glass of water all over her laptop in the middle of it. So things like that will go in, and a joke will be made on her about that, and that actually is the one place where everybody does read. It's the only email that you can rely on actually if you want to get everybody to hear something that they will read it. So that's another sort of angle of communication which we've taken. But both of these things were actually in before the lockdown came. But they've kind of, so that before the daily meeting was 5 minutes, now it's extended to 10 because we want to let people just banter a bit.
And we are almost out of time, but I want to squeeze in one more question that was just come through from Michael because I like this one. What What good examples have you heard of bad news being delivered well in this environment?
Sorry, of what being delivered well?
Bad news being delivered well in this environment when times are difficult. Can you think of any examples of good leadership getting bad news across in an effective way? Quite tricky one off the top of your head.
I think, again, and it reaches back to what we've said up until this point. Bad news, good news, bad news, whatever the news is, delivering it authentically, clearly, transparently, I think is the best that can be achieved. I think transparent goes back to a big point there when it's bad news, whether it's retrenchments or furloughing or difficult times in the business. Yeah, to be as transparent and as forthcoming and as authentic. I love it when a leader is able to say, this is really tough for me, and we've really, really thought hard about this. It's not what we would have wanted to do straight off the bat. That adds a lot to the message landing well for me. Charles, what would you say? Bad news.
I didn't have to do this. Sam did, who's our CEO. We actually were in a situation where we realized as soon as this came along that our potential for growth was going to be limited, because due to a lot of the customers who we were expecting to grow were not going to be there anymore. And so we needed to, so Sam had to put across exactly that we were going to need to cut cost. We weren't willing to make anybody unemployed. And so we needed to have discussions about how we were going to do that within the organization, and that's what happened. And within a week or probably 10 days, we had plans, we had ideas from people within the organization, and we cut within 4 weeks. We cut a bunch of costs without it having to affect the employees too much.
I think the only point I'd add on there for Michael is timelessly. The worst is when bad news sort of filters down via. Yeah. Leaders haven't had the the foresight to bring it to the table timelessly. I think timelessly is also really important.
Yeah, not trying to sugarcoat it.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just finally, do you think also leaders being able to admit when they've made mistakes? Because we've seen that with leaders around the world in the middle of this crisis, who put their hands up and said, okay, we got it wrong, this is all unprecedented, but sorry, we made a mistake, seem to be the ones who people are more likely to trust. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at the trust equation very quickly, I mean, you can go and have a look at the trust equation. You can Google it, it's very easy. Like the denominator on there is always self-centeredness. And I think when a leader is able to apologize, they take their ego out of it. They demonstrate that they're human as well. I think that's so important. And I think it really engenders trust. It does for me. I'm more likely to trust a leader is able to admit when they've made a mistake.
Fantastic.
Damn, we're finishing now. It's my favorite subject. Ego of leaders.
sorry, Charles. For next week's podcast.
I'll have to do it. I know you two could go on. Fascinating. Okay, but I think we are just about out of time. So let me sum up. Any tips for our putative leaders among us? We're saying earn trust. That's the key. You need to earn trust, and everything else will fall into place. Be transparent. Be honest with your people. Look after yourself, reduce your own stress levels by letting go. Don't try to take all the decisions yourself. Delegate responsibility. Communicate well. We've talked about being clear and direct. Be authentic so people can see that that's you. And accept the changes that we're all going to have to make. It's already underway. It's going to happen. You can't stop it. So accept the changes. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenefer and Charles. It's absolutely fantastic to have such a great amount of expertise on hand and to hear you discuss it between yourselves with your different perspectives. It's really, really interesting. I know we've said silver linings are not easy to come by at the moment, but I think we've learned more about how we can work well together, how we can live well together. So it's all useful.